Hello, everybody. I'm Sandy, founder of Just Travel with Sandy, and I help women over 50 move past travel overwhelm so they can explore the world with confidence, ease, and joy. And I also work as a travel advisor, curating meaningful, stress free trips for my clients from start to finish. And this podcast is where we talk about real life travel, how to plan it, enjoy it, and grow from it without the stress or perfectionism. So let's make travel feel doable, inspiring, and absolutely worth it. And I've just written a book. It came out a few days earlier than expected, but it's officially released. I know, right? It's part memoir and not really travel guide, but it's more, I would say, travel slash personal development,
Mm.
but it's mostly a memoir. And it's truly a candid look at how life has personally shaped my life and how it potentially can transform yours too. So I'm really excited today to have with me Sue Aspinall. And I really enjoyed our talk the other day, and both of us agreed that travel is a huge catalyst to help us grow as humans. So, Sue, I would like to, first of all, thank you so much for being here with
Thank
us
you too.
today. Absolutely thrilled. There's a couple things I definitely want you to touch on. But first, talk a little bit about your like how did you get into travel? Your memoir in a nutshell.
Yeah. Uh, my first venture out of the UK, where I was born and lived as until my later teenage years, was to Amsterdam. And I did an exchange with school and stayed with a family in Amsterdam. And I just remember how it opened my eyes to a completely different way of being a teenager. And I loved the freedom that my exchange partner had. A lot of that was to do with she grew up in a multinational family. She was living in the city, very different from the way that I'd been brought up. But I loved the fact that it made me think differently. It got me into contact with different young people who'd had different life experiences and had families and parents who'd come from different countries to live in the Netherlands as well. So that was my first introduction, really, to the exposure that you can get to so many new ideas and inspirations and people who just teach you through conversation and sharing their lives. So when I was in my 20s, I did what a lot of people were doing in the UK, which was taking a year off work and traveling. The old hippie trail it was,
Yep.
but India and to China. And I was very drawn to China because my mother's parents worked and lived there. So I was very curious about that element. It had been part of my childhood narrative as well. Um, and I found that I was really I was craving to travel on my own, but I just didn't have the nerve. So I was lucky enough to persuade one of the women that set off in our group to travel with me off the beaten track in both India and in China. And I kind of got the thirst then for the independence, the adventure, the risks that you have to take by going away from where most tourists would be. And so I started just with small trips on my own. The first one I ever did on my own was to the mainland Greece. And then I just slowly built up the capacity and the courage to do more to the point now where I love doing longer, what I would call pilgrimages. So, traveling from Japan overland to the Netherlands along the Silk Roads was
Nice.
one, from the Netherlands to South Africa through West Africa. And
Mhm.
really to kind of prove to myself and to everybody that the world is safe and people are friendly and helpful, that we're part of humanity, and it is possible to travel on local transport, to find places to stay with families, and to learn for me, it transforms the way I think about the world.
I absolutely love that. And I'm so glad you touched on the safety part
Yeah,
because I, like you, do a lot of solo travel. It's my favorite
yeah,
way to
yeah,
travel. My daughter has traveled on her own, and even when she was 9, I sent her from America to Ireland on a plane.
yeah.
And people were like, "Oh my gosh, is she going to be safe?" And I so agree with you that that is something that holds way too many people back.
Yeah,
And it's what we put out is what we get back, right? Obviously, we have to be aware of our
absolutely.
situation and our surroundings, but
Yeah,
touch a little bit on that. Touch a little bit on the safety part because I say it all the time, but it would be so good if the audience hears it from someone else who's done so much extensive
yeah,
solo travel in off the beaten path areas. I would love for you
yeah,
to touch on that part.
yeah. The it's interesting because I realized that safety was getting in the way of me going to West Africa. And I had this idea that it was going to be one of the places that was going to be the most challenging. So I kind of left going there until, I was older. And interestingly, that wasn't my experience when I went was that I was completely safe. I was surrounded by people who wanted to help me, and I was often traveling with other women who were moving from one African country to another just as part of their normal migration. And so you're absolutely right. It is completely to do with the energy and presence that you have. So when I travel, I'm going there with the purpose of connecting, learning, finding out as much as I can, and meeting people from all sorts of different walks of life. And I know that in order to do that, I have to be very outgoing, in terms of connecting, smiling, talking to people when I can, reaching out, asking people politely for help, joining in with people in the shared taxis, having a laugh with the person who might be giving me a ride on a motorbike. It's kind of like bringing into the world as much joy and friendliness and just engagement, really, and asking questions and being curious and finding out about people's families and what's going on in their lives. I often ask the question, what are your aspirations? What are you hoping for your family? And then I'll say, like, tell me about the challenges. Like, what are the real challenges for you and your family right now in this town or in your village? So just opening up those kind of conversations. Um, so that's what I would be saying to people is that you create what you give out in terms of, the energy and the connection. Yeah,
And I love what you just said because I don't care where you are in the world, UK, Germany, West Africa, China, people want joy, happiness, community, and
yeah,
connection. That's
yeah,
really what it boils down to.
yeah,
And when you really, truly, authentically connect with people and really not just pretend to, but really care, I
yeah,
think that's so much of it, right? And
yeah,
I always say I mean, we humans, we take ourselves way too seriously, way too often, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
And we're just this little speck in the universe. And
yeah,
the world has so much to offer.
yeah,
And really being interested in other people's lives, I just love that so much. And I
yeah,
love your question because you really truly care.
yeah,
I when I went to China, and I didn't realize this when we talked last time, or I forgot, I don't know, maybe early onset Alzheimer's, but I have a strong, deep love and connection to China as well,
right,
because my
right,
father was born and raised in China. And when I went to China back in, I can't remember the last time, in 2017, I think it was, doesn't matter. A lot of people were like, "You're going to China on your
yeah,
own?" And
yeah,
and I'm like, "Yeah, why not?" Like
yeah,
people, and again, that safety thing came up. So I love, love, love what you shared. That's just
yeah,
so powerful.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, you said you wanted to go to West Africa, but you waited a little bit on that. What, like, what inspires you? What is the next trip that you're going to head out on? Or do you
Yeah.
like, what is it that, or do you have like a bucket list, or where does that come from?
It's so strange because I obviously hear from other people about places they've been to, and some resonate with me and some don't. Some that I'm really curious about. I get seeds that are planted in my head, and I might forget about them, and then something will crop up, and I'll think, ah, yeah. But it was it's often really interesting how it happens because something will be happening in my what I call my settled life, when I'm working and everything. And it'll be coming to a natural arc of finishing. And I know, and I'm getting restless. And when I know that I'm getting restless, I know that there's probably a travel or a
I
relocation brewing.
know the feeling too
You know
well.
what I mean? And it's so dependent on what's happening in terms of my life and where I'm at and how long I feel ready to take. So is it going to be months on end, or is it going to be a month, or is it going to be a week? And so definitely for a trip like going to West Africa, I knew that I would be wanting to have the time, like not really a time limit on it. I just wanted to have the freedom to go with the flow, really get into Africa time and the way things work in that continent and in the countries there, and just go to a depth that really was at a depth and a pace that was working for me, so that I could really take it on board. But also, it was a transition out of quite a challenging contract with a workplace, and so I knew that I'd need like a break and to process all of that, as well as really adapt and take on board what I was going through in terms of the travel experience. So it really depends on where I am in the stage of my life and what is drawing me. And I really do feel it's like some places pull me, you know?
I 100% agree.
So I mean, at the moment, I'm really drawn back to the African continent, to some parts of it that I haven't traveled through yet. Um, I'm very drawn back to China because there are some questions I have about my ancestors, and I'm really curious to know more about that. I love the mountains, so I'm drawn to Patagonia and the Inca Trail parts of that. So yeah, it very much depends on what I'm reading, who I'm talking to, what's going on in my life, what space I've got in my life to kind of take these times as well. And of course,
I,
there's a budget in it as well,
well,
isn't
sadly,
but that's another thing that sometimes gets in people's way, and they say I haven't got the money for it. And what I've learned is that you always make it work.
I am so glad you brought that up. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I get that all the time too. I don't have the money,
Yeah, yeah,
but I feel like a lot of times that's just an excuse
absolute.
because there it doesn't have to be a 5-star, Four Seasons or
No,
Oberoi stay, right? That's not what this is about, and that's not how you connect anyway.
no,
So there is the most expensive part is probably the flight, right?
yes,
And
yeah,
after that, you can totally, totally make it. So
yeah,
I'm so glad you brought that up.
yeah, yeah.
But I'm also glad you said you get this pull because I actually did a TikTok this morning. I'm like getting really restless, like really like,
Yeah.
and I do have a trip planned. So I'm leaving in I think 10 days. I was on the Delta app earlier and it says you can check in 10 days. I'm like, yes. but I'm already planning my trip for September, and then I have a trip planned for February to India next year.
Yeah,
So I 100% agree with you. It's that restlessness. It's that,
yeah,
where is it coming
yeah,
from? I 100% agree.
yeah, yeah. And I think as well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I always have in the back of my mind, like life's a finite time, and I don't know how long I've got. And so if I've got this idea and this pull, then I feel I have to get on with it. It's not something I can put off. Otherwise, it might never happen.
A
And
hundred
what I've
percent.
learned as well is that by actually being spontaneous, more spontaneous and going with the flow, with that flow or pull, I've managed to go to places that are now off limits or,
Yeah.
have changed so much that you would not experience it in the same way that I was able to when I went. So, I've kind of learned that if it's coming up for you, then
Do
try
it.
and make it possible. Yeah.
100%. I 100% agree with you. As I get older too, I'm like, I just want to travel as much and as long as I
Yeah.
can, as long as I'm able to,
Yeah.
because I 100% agree.
Yeah.
So, is there, I mean, I know you've traveled extensively and I know they've all had their fantastic moments, but is
Mm.
there one specific trip that really shaped you, formed you, or had a major impact on you in a way that others maybe hadn't?
Mm. I think that each of the traveling experiences that I've had has shaped the next phase of my life.
Mhm.
So I can't say that there's any particular travel or incident or encounter that has transformed everything for me. Um, I think that when I was traveling in West Africa, I had more time and I had the experience and I was very intentional around the range of people that I wanted to try and come into contact with. And I was taking more risks, and going to parts of the countries that maybe as a younger traveler I wouldn't have done. And so, I had examples of like when I was in Liberia, I went to the eastern part of Liberia and I met a man there called Morris, and I was in the back of a shared taxi. He was the passenger. And we ended up talking towards the end of our trip, and he was explaining how he was a uh, child soldier in the 1990s, that he lost his family, and the way to survive was to be a child soldier and join the rebel army. He got embroiled in all of Charles Taylor's regime as well, and just got to a point where, as an 18-year-old, he just knew that he had to get out, or he was going to either die, or he was just going to be leading a life that was
Mhm.
just not something that he could ever live with going forwards. And he explained how, he went with a number of other young people across the border of Cote d'Ivoire towards Ghana and ended up in the refugee camp at Bujumbura in Ghana. And he was one of the lucky ones who managed to get some counseling through the UN counseling service at the time. And he just said, that when he ended up going back to Liberia, he knew that he had to take that experience back to support people like him who were trying to integrate back into Liberian society and build that society up, which is struggling from that history. They've got generational trauma and huge unemployment and difficulties for young people, and he can see the generational drift of the experience of adults like himself. So he runs a therapeutic center in one of
Wow.
the eastern towns. and with very little funding now, it's done through donations that he can get and a little bit of funding from the government. But he's got a team around him who he tries to train and get some expertise in so that they can support young people. And the, he's the kind of guy that has an impact on me because I
Absolutely.
listen to what he's trying to do and that duty and responsibility that he feels towards his his country, but also
Country,
people like him who are
people.
trying to integrate and make it better. Yeah.
That it even was safe for him to go back because you don't even know how all, the corruptness and or the
Yeah,
corruption, I guess is the word, how all that works. So
absolutely.
those stories, and that's when we really realize when we goes back to like we take ourselves so damn seriously, is
Yeah,
like that's really when you talk and come in touch with people, how much, and nobody's heard of him, right? But
no,
how, what a huge impact. And there's thousands of people like that.
yeah,
So I can see that these are the stories. And I always say, the travel, it's not about, well, it's not only about, for some people it may be, but for me it's not about the destination or about
mm,
the historic, well, not even the historic, but this, the
yeah,
tourist destinations. It's
yeah,
about the people,
yeah,
the connection, the culture, the history.
yeah,
All that is so
yeah,
much bigger than, say, in Paris, the Eiffel Tower, right? It's
yeah,
just, and I'm just using that as an example, and the
mm,
humanness and the connection that we
mm,
have. And
mm,
that is so powerful. So I'm
mm,
so glad you shared that story, because that
mm,
too, now I've not obviously experienced that, but that too is what travel means to me,
yeah,
is getting to know people on a deeper level
yeah,
and what it is that they're doing in their
yeah.
day-to-day life.
And I mean, you'll have this experience as well. You get it raw, you know, um, and on the other side of that, you get to see the real drive and energy, particularly of the younger generation in some of the West African countries. Um, I mean, I experienced that in Liberia as well, but another example would be that I spent an afternoon in um, the Nolde Residency Art Gallery in Accra with Sally, who's the curator there. And what they're doing is exactly what you were alluding to, is they're trying to get out into the world a message about Ghana, which is not just about beaches and nature reserves and nice wild
Right,
animals, but actually that Ghana's got this really vibrant and really energized culture that embraces the old the older traditions that are really
right.
ingrained into people's ancestry and lives in Ghana, and how they're bringing it forwards into this incredible artwork. I mean, it's just
Amazing.
phenomenal what is happening. And it's just to change that narrative, so that people who go and visit these countries actually see there's a different narrative, there's a different identity that is very much coming from the people itself. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's so many talented people out there. So many talented people that never get seen or heard,
Yeah.
and even if it's just like in their like in their own little area, right? But it's
Yeah.
so powerful. And I
Yeah.
feel like, especially in this Western civilization, there's so much commercialism and so much big box stuff.
Yeah.
And I love supporting these women and men
Yeah.
who really are just trying to be seen and make a difference and bring all that culture and history. I mean, when you look
Yeah.
at it, some of these countries, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, whereas
Yeah.
we're just a speck, we're just like
Yeah.
babies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but a lot of people don't, I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's media focuses more, social media, but that's what it is about to me too. So it's
Yeah,
so, so powerful.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so do you have any travel planned right now or
I have a plan brewing, Sandy. So I've got some short trips.
okay,
Um, so I've got a week's trip to Spain where I'm involved in some leadership development work. So that's kind of linked to work.
nice,
And then another week when I'm going to Johannesburg to work with an amazing woman who's setting up a leadership center there
nice,
for women right across the spectrum in South Africa as part of a way of trying to support the development of a united country there. So really exciting projects like that. And then what's brewing is another visit to the African continent
nice,
for a few
nice.
months. Yeah, I mean, just I'm just so fascinated by the history and culture. That's what brings me alive. And I'll be going to Botswana and sort of up the central parts of the African continent, but not on safari. I'll be the one who's on the
Right,
local bus going
right, right,
from
right.
town to town, like the people along the way. Yeah, so it'll be very different.
So I love that. And let's just touch on that a minute.
Yeah.
So what would you tell, especially a female that
Mm,
maybe wants to do solo travel, maybe not even as exotic to begin with as West
mm,
Africa or Africa, but what tips, what suggestions would you give? And let's talk about a female because a lot of females, and there's no judgment here, but there's so much fear
yeah.
and it, it's hard for me to convey to people like you don't have to have so much fear. So, what
Yeah.
tips, what suggestions would
Yeah.
you give a solo female traveler who wants to set out on her first adventure? And like I said, it may not have to be even as exotic to
No.
start with
No.
as West
Yeah.
Africa.
I mean, I say that to people, people that I meet here in the Netherlands. I just say, right, okay, your first adventure could be a weekend in Amsterdam. So, you book a hostel night overnight on one day, so you get the experience of living away from your own home, and you don't even need to book anything. Just walk around a couple of the areas on your own and have the experience of eating a meal on your own. So little things like that might be a big step for somebody. And then with your phone, just take pictures of things that really inspire you. So you're kind of drawn to look around you and, try and have conversations with people.
Hmm.
Don't worry about the language. Whatever language you can manage, do it. And then from there you just go a little bit further, like go over the border into another country that's not the same one that you live in and travel by train, not go by,
Hmm.
by on a flight because you'll
Right,
talk to people on the train or
right,
go on a bus. So
right.
it's just being really intentional about trying something different that you've not done before. And it's just building a muscle of courage. That's
And
how I
taking baby
started.
steps, right?
Baby
Taking baby
steps,
steps. Yep,
baby
I love that.
steps.
I
Yeah,
absolutely love that. Yep.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I know, being from Germany, it's a little different, but here in America, because the country is so big, right?
yeah,
And the
yeah,
cultures even within the country are so different. Like the South is so different to the North
yeah,
and the West Coast, like it's all so different. I was just in the Midwest for something and I was in three different cities that I'd never been to, and I was like, it was so different. Like the
yeah,
people, like everything was so different. So I'm speaking to the American audience now, you know, even if it's like to another state, like
yeah,
if you're in New York, go down to South Carolina or North Carolina, like it doesn't have to be. And the train system, of course, here is not as good as it is in Europe. I do love the
yeah,
trains in Europe, but
yeah,
or there are trains, of course, or drive, but start small, like start
Yeah,
small. In fact, I
yeah,
had somebody who was talking about solo travels on a podcast. She said that because she talked about solo travel and how now she really loves it. But for her to get up the gumption, she literally just went out to the next town and had dinner on
yeah,
her own.
yeah,
And that's all it has to be,
yeah,
right? It
yeah,
doesn't have to be this massive. And then you'll see the more you step out of your comfort zone, the more you'll
yeah.
grow and the easier it gets.
Yeah. And it's very much what I do when I move countries, actually. When I move to a new country, I always have the Lonely Planet guide of the country. And I'll start planning it, and I'll think, right, this is I moved to live in Japan, didn't know anybody, didn't know anything about the country, didn't speak the language, nothing. Had the Lonely Planet guide. And I just kind of lived there as a as a tourist, but I did it my way.
Yep.
So, I'd just go to a different town whenever I had a weekend free, and I'd find somewhere to eat, somewhere to stay, and just did little steps like that. Yeah.
I love that. Absolutely love that.
Yeah,
And the world is so big and it has so much to offer, so much more than
completely.
our backyards. And,
Yeah.
like you said, there's some places that I'm not really drawn to,
No.
and other places that I'm like, it's in my gut, like I have to
Yeah.
go.
That is true.
Um,
So true.
it's and that's fine, right? So
Yeah.
pick somewhere that really that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Either just a gut feeling, which is usually what I go by, or if
Yeah.
you like if you know about the history of the culture or whatever,
Yeah.
but or the food. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And the food in different countries, that's so amazing too. And not the tourist like, but really go into
Yeah.
where there's not a single tourist. That's usually where the food is the
Yeah,
best.
absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I do as well is that I'm always getting inspiration from conversations and things like that, or, something I'll read in a magazine, or, I can be on a flight somewhere and read something in the flight magazine, and I'll just think, oh, yeah, that sounds really interesting. Take a picture on the phone, and then it'll pop up again, at some point.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, it's just kind of making a collection of those places that it just seem to resonate in some
Yes.
way. Um,
Yes.
Particularly if you've got an interest in food or art or something like
Hmm.
that. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I love
Yeah.
that. So
So,
before we wrap it up, Sue, is there anything that you would like the audience, like to leave with the audience? Any last minute suggestion or tip or anything?
well, I have this little saying, Sandy, that I'd like to share with your listeners. And it goes like this: be you, be true, be bold, because everyone can break the mold. And the reason I want to share that is, we're all doing our own stuff, and you can create your own path to the place that is going to give you the food or the nourishment or the inspiration that's going to take your life on to the next place. And the world will wrap around you, definitely. And I think what you get from traveling, particularly when you're on your own, is a real mirror back to you
Mhm.
of who you are, how you're showing up in the world.
Yep.
And what a great gift. Yeah.
Yep. That is perfect. I love and that just really hit home, the mirror
Mhm.
back, right? It's so,
Yeah.
so true.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. That was a beautiful note to end it on. Thank you so much. So I hope today's episode gave you, the audience, a boost of inspiration. It sure did me. And maybe even a few practical takeaways to move you closer to the trip that you've been dreaming of. And if you love what you heard, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe, share it with a friend, or leave a quick review because it helps more women like you find your way to confident and joyful travel. So until next time, keep dreaming, keep planning, and keep exploring with heart. And remember, every great journey starts with a single step. Thank you so much, Sue. I'm so
Thank
grateful
you,
that you're here with
Sandy.
us today. Thank you.
Thank you too.